Hi, Hope Community Church. This is Brad, and today is Palm Sunday. This is when we would celebrate or remember the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. And as I was thinking about Palm Sunday, I want to try to connect those events with today and try to encourage you. So, if you think about Palm Sunday, this is when Jesus rode into Jerusalem, and the followers of Jesus were extremely excited. They had the palm branches that they were laying down in front of him as he was riding in. And again, there's all this excitement and just very encouraged and looking forward to the future of Jesus reigning as king. And they probably thought that meant as an earthly king. But in a short period of time, a lot happens for the followers of Jesus. They go from celebrating his triumphal entry to preparing his body for the grave. And so how can that be encouraging? What's going on there? Well, in John Piper's book called The Passion of Christ, he addresses that with looking at 50 reasons for Jesus' suffering and his death. He says this in the book. He says, the central issue of Jesus' death is not the cause, but the purpose or the meaning of his death. And so I would like to use one of the topics that he talks about as a way to encourage us during these stressful times. And one of the reasons that he states, is in the book, it was reason number 27. One of the reasons that he states for Christ's suffering and dying was to become a sympathetic and helpful priest. The verse that he uses for that is Hebrews 4:15 through 16. So I'm going to read this. And I'd like for this to be a verse that maybe you save on your phone somewhere or write it down, but maybe think through this week as we're moving towards Easter. It says, this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So I'm going to look at these two verses and look at them in a little more detail and see if you can be encouraged by this. The first thing that we see here that I want to think about as I encourage you to draw near to God, something can happen. Well, a lot of things can happen. But one thing that can happen is that as you draw near to God, you start to recognize how holy he is. And as a result of recognizing how holy he is, you can start to recognize how sinful you are. And it can start to cause you to pull away instead of drawing near. But here's the thing that I want to encourage you with. Look at the beginning of this verse. It says, this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses. This is an incredible fact for us to think about as we draw near to God. That is, that God, holy, came to earth as a man. And as a man, he walked on this earth, experienced all the things that we experienced except for sinning. But because he experienced all those things that we experienced, all the testings and all the trials that we go through, he understands our weaknesses. He's not caught off guard by us. So let that be encouraging to you, that wherever it is that you're struggling, God understands that. He can relate to us because of his suffering and death. So knowing that God, or in this case Jesus, understands our weaknesses, we're told to do something. And that is, we're to come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. Dr. Constable says this. He says, this was shocking to the early Christians because for them, the high priest of Judaism could only approach God at his earthly throne in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle or the temple, once a year. Dr. Constable doesn't add that, they would see that it was only one line of people that could go, that this priestly line had to also go through all these purification rituals before they could even attempt to go into God's presence. So they saw that all of this formalism that was required to go into God's presence has now been completely removed by Jesus' suffering and death on the cross. And that we're now, in light of him understanding our weakness, we're told to boldly go into God's presence. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this. It says, there we will receive his mercy and find grace. Just to remind you, mercy is not getting what we deserve. Okay, so think about that. He understands us, our weaknesses. He's asking us to come boldly to go into his throne. And he says there, we're not going to get what we deserve, that punishment, because Jesus took on that punishment. And it says, you're going to receive grace, you're going to receive mercy, and you're going to receive grace. Grace is giving us what we don't deserve, giving us that forgiveness of sins that is a gift for us. So the last thing connected with this is the point that I think Dr. Constable wrote. He said, Hebrews was written to people who were in danger of pulling away from God during hard times instead of drawing near to God. I thought that was really appropriate for us as we're in these hard times. Maybe they're hard just because they're unusual and we don't even know how to handle them or what the future looks like. What does that hold? And I love what it says again. It says, these people were in danger of pulling away from God during hard times instead of drawing near. Now, there's many ways to draw near to God. His word, prayer, music, there's lots of things, fellowship. What I'm going to ask you to do, the elders, we've talked about this, is that we'd like to continue to give you an opportunity to participate in something that we can talk about during house church. And one of those things that we'd like you to do is communion this week. And if you think of it as far as a current calendar goes, Thursday would have been the day that Jesus had his Last Supper with his disciples, where he would have taught them about communion and told them, do this to remember me into the future. Continue to do this. This act of remembering Jesus through the wine and the bread that he was partaking with the disciples as he sat around during this meal. So what we would like you to do is consider having communion, whether you could be by yourself, you could be with just your spouse or your family, and have communion. Now, I'm not asking you to go to the store and buy whatever juice or wine you want to use to represent communion, or to buy unleavened bread, because I really don't want you going out of your house at this point. So you can do this with whatever you have at your house. It can be something as simple as water and crackers. Because remember, it's the symbolism that is used to remember the liquid is Jesus' blood, the solid food is representing his body, that were broken for us, or shed, the blood was shed, the body was broken for us to have forgiveness of sins, so that we can draw near to God. And so the more we can remember that, hopefully the more we draw near to God. Attached to the email, I'll have a devotion that Rob put together for you to help you with this as you do this. Now, the way I want this to be connected with the house church is that I'm hoping that you get a chance to do this with your family, or again, whoever it is that you're doing it with. and then you can share how this went with the house church. How the experience was for you. In the email that I'll send you, or the devotion that Rob made, he makes a good point that this is a fairly natural progression for our church body. If you think about it, we went from having communion up front to having it in the pews, to then moving it to the basement, where we did it as a group in the basement. And then recently, Rob had us do communion at each table. So we've been moving this from a corporate thing down to a family thing at our church anyway. So I'm really excited about this opportunity to do this. So let me just finish with this. The point of this message is to try to encourage you wherever it is that you're at in your walk with God, and encourage you to draw near to Him. And as you draw near to Him, I want you to remember that one of the reasons that Christ suffered and died was to become a sympathetic and helpful priest. Thank you.